Dr. E.
Wow, what an honor. What a pleasure.
Man, it's a delight. I was trying to remember if we've met before or not. I'm not sure if we have.
I think I might have seen you. Did you play trio with your dad, like at Metro or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we met. I talked to your dad briefly, but I saw you guys play. That was probably about 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because as I've been checking you out, I've been feeling like we've been in the same space before. So I'm glad that we get to talk now.
It's amazing. And I've been a fan of your dad's for a long time and studied his books and his radio programs. And, so to meet you and talk with you is just wonderful. Yeah.
Well, Eli Yamin, I'm not surprised because you are kind of in a similar lineage. I think you're a little more devoted to the educational component of the thing, but in terms of being a player and a composer and also having this aspect of your work that is involved and engaged in the community, it's part of a tradition that I recognize. I can see how you were aware of Ben along the way.
Indeed. And that WBGO is bringing us all together because that's kind of in the water at
Yeah.
WBGO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The sort of excuse for getting together is to talk about Jazz Power Initiative and particularly this event that's coming up. But before we get into all that, we have to talk about your overall journey that got you here.
Well, I grew up in Highland Park, New Jersey, and we didn't have a lot of jazz around. My parents had maybe a couple jazz records. They liked classical music and a little bit of rock and roll, the Woodstock stuff. But I heard BGO down on the left side of the dial when it was a dial. And that music just turned me on. And I started taking notes. I would sit on the couch and listen to Ronald Hamilton and write down every name she mentioned on a yellow pad, and then go to the library and look these people up: Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Billie Holiday, Bobby McFerrin, Abbey Lincoln, and just one after another, and just soak it in, soak it in. I went to Rutgers in New Brunswick. I got a radio show there early on. Actually, we had a high school radio station in Highland Park. So I had been doing radio from the time I was 13. And I would always steal ideas I heard on BGO. Taj Mahal record was my theme song. And I did a concert and club review with at high school, which was like announcing all the artists playing the local clubs. So when I got to RSU, a cat who was working there, Rich Skelly, told me that they were having an open house at BGO. So I went over there. I met Duke Marcos, who was the operations director. And he said, "Oh, you're at RSU? I went to Rutgers." And he basically hired me on the spot as a board op, $3.35 an hour. And you got to come in on Sunday night and you got to play Jazz from the Archives, the recording, and sit there and monitor the broadcast. And my first day of work was my 18th birthday,
Wow.
1986. And I'm sitting there and I had to make the concert listings. I forget what it was called now, the Jazz 88 calendar, or whatever. That was my first job. I had to mix that, which was the thing that I'd been doing in high school. And then before long, Wiley Rollins, the program director, started calling me to do fill-ins. And my first show on BGO I was 18 years old. And I did an overnight from 1 to 6 a.m. And it was amazing. And then I got fill-ins. I started producing Jazz from the Archives with the staff of the Institute of Jazz Studies, Dan Morgenstern, Ed Berger, Vincent Pilot, Lawrence Schoenberg, and learned so much of the history of the jazz. And they would bring in people like Benny Carter and Milt Hinton for interviews. So I got to meet those guys and listen to their stories. And then I would go back and edit the tapes. So I heard everything twice, which was even more great for learning. Then I produced Portraits in Blue with Bob Porter for 5 years, Portraits in Blue, 7 years on Jazz from the Archives. So every week immersed in different blues artists and just absorbing all this great information and music. And then doing fill-ins on the air. Then I had my own show called Sunday Morning Harmony, where we played jazz, piano, and guitar records. And meanwhile, I'm developing as a jazz pianist and starting to go on the road. My first big gig was Duke Ellington Sophisticated Ladies. I was a music director in 1993 with Mercedes Ellington. And through that, I got to see all over the country, 29 cities across the country, how jazz and theater is such a great marriage.
Wait, tell me a little
And
more about that.
I had been introduced to that idea at the Crossroads Theater in New Brunswick, where I grew up. It was a black theater company, a regional black theater company. And I saw amazing shows there, Bubbling Brown Sugar, Ain't Misbehavin', a play with music called Slow Dance on the Killing Ground that was just so mystical and incredible and just drew me in. And then when I got to BGO, I soon heard from Amiri Baraka, who lived in Newark and was always listening to the station. He took me under his wing, invited me to his house. He used to play Duke Ellington records for me. And he and his wife, Amina Baraka, they introduced me to the whole Black arts movement and how jazz is not just music, but it's also theater, it's dance, it's poetry, it's stories, it's a whole aesthetic. And they invite me to perform in their basement coffee house. So fast forward, so then I get my first gig on the road. I'm out there, Duke Ellington, Sophisticated Ladies. I'm in these theaters, and I'm getting more of this idea of jazz and theater, jazz and theater, jazz and theater, and how it brings together the dancers and the musicians and the story and that's what really grabbed me about jazz, is how it's a way of telling stories, it's a way of communicating, and that's kind of led me eventually to start my own company, which was first called the Jazz Drama Program, and now is Jazz Power Initiative.
But there's a little piece of it also, which is all this educational stuff, right? Like you were at Jazz at Lincoln Center. And actually, when I spoke to Lakecia Benjamin the other day, she has this story about how she first met you when she was at LaGuardia High School and you were a substitute teacher. And she sort of sassed you one day when she came in. But then rather than trying to discipline her, you rolled with it, which, is a sign of a great teacher to try to,
Oh, man. She was so wise, just at such a young age. And she was into Charles Mingus. And once she told me that, I was like, great. I mean, a high school kid who's like passionate about Charles Mingus. I mean, she was so, just wise beyond her years. But yes, teaching, after I did Sophisticated Ladies, I got opportunities to become musical direct fan of the opera. I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm into the jazz and theater piece. So I ended up volunteering at the West Side YMCA to see because I wanted to see what I was going to do next. And they said, well, what can you do? I said, I'm a musician. Well, we need a teacher in our kinder camp. Can you do that? I was like, I don't know. So next thing I know, they hired me $25 an hour and I'm in front of these 3 and 4-year-old kids. And I'm trying to explain these long concepts to them. They don't want to hear that. Just give me a song, give me a dance, give me a movement. But I got really intrigued by teaching these young children, and they hired me at the Y to be the nursery school music teacher in the fall and doubled my salary. I was making big bucks, $50 an hour. I couldn't believe it. And I was a young jazz musician, so I was doing 8, 9 hours of teaching nursery school music, playing little clubs in the village, and learning a lot about how to break music down to its most elemental elements. So I developed a jazz curriculum for nursery school kids, and we did Flatfoot Flugie, and we did the Potato Chips, and we did Ain't Nobody Here But Us Chickens, Louis Jordan, and all kinds of movement that went with it, and finger plays and some folk music. It was a tremendous entry into teaching. And from there, I got involved in storytelling workshops or songs for stories, where I'd go into elementary schools and write songs that were based on the books the kids were reading, take ideas from the kids. And then from there, I've landed at middle school, the Louis Armstrong Middle School in Queens. And that's where I started to write jazz musicals with a 6th grade teacher. And that was our way of getting young people thoroughly immersed in jazz culture through music, dance, theater, and a story they could relate to. And then eventually my master's degree in music education. And that's where I met Lakecia, because I was student teaching with Bob Stewart. And then he started hiring me as a sub. And then just kept going from there. Then Jazz at Lincoln Center after that, they were looking for somebody who had experience starting a middle school jazz program. And I had done that at the Louis Armstrong Middle School with the Jazz Drama Program. So that led me to a 13-year stint at Jazz at Lincoln Center, where I was the director of the Middle School Jazz Academy, but I was also involved in adult education and training artists, fellow artists, to do educational presentations for the State Department. So it's a lot of wonderful stuff. I even did a workshop with business leaders on how jazz is a model to manage your team. And that was a very successful workshop. We did hundreds of those workshops.
I've heard of people that do that, that talk about the jazz experience and how it can be extrapolated into business. I mean, I'm sure each one of these would be a whole conversation, but I am curious, how does that work and what is the argument and do they understand? What pieces are you able to break it down into that they can understand or take with them?
Well, I got to work with a wonderful professor at Fordham Graduate School of Business named John Holwitz, and he taught me about autonomous flexible team management. And that's what we do in jazz. You have a band leader, you know, you say you're the piano player, I'm the piano player, it's my band, I got a saxophone player, a singer, drum, bass. But when it's the bass solo, I'm not really the leader now. I'm accompanying, I'm supporting, you know. When it's the singer is singing, she's taking the lead. So we kind of share leadership. It kind of passes around. And we all know kind of how to adjust our role in that context. Now, I'm still the leader. I got to make sure the band gets paid. I got to make sure we end in a good way. I got to think about the set list and stuff. But I'm constantly taking the temperature of the audience and the band and trying to keep a flow going. I'm more of a facilitator than a dictator. So we have a great culture for this in jazz, and a lot of businesses are organized in this way. It's much less hierarchical than it once was, the traditional models. So companies like Quaker Oats, even the U.S. Army, the Coast Guard is very good with this. And that's why they actually did better in Hurricane Katrina, because when the government was trying to like figure out who's doing what, and they had to go up the chain of command to Washington to get supplies and stuff, the Coast Guard was already empowered to have these 5 or 6 person teams with boats and supplies, and they could get out to people and serve the community in a more flexible way. So there's a lot of advantages to be able to be like a jazz band as opposed to an orchestra, which is much more from the top down, you know, dictatorial. And so we cultivate this, we call it syncopated leadership. And it's an amazing experience for executives and business students. Yeah.
And what about with younger kids? I love the idea that you started with 4-year-olds and you had to learn how to simplify, because of course you come in with all these ideas and you got to break it all the way down. But like, what do you think are the basic tenets that can be communicated to kids and up through middle school, I guess, from the jazz experience, whether or not they become jazz musicians?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has their own particular way of expressing emotion, expressing their insights on the world. And jazz gives us a model for that. Every solo counts. And, you know, even somebody who doesn't have a lot of facility, they have something to say. And that's been one of the great satisfying moments for me, is working with kids that maybe have only been playing the trumpet for 3 months or 6 months. Give them 3 notes, give them a rhythm, and most likely they've got a sense of rhythm because they're hearing rhythm in their music, and whatever the popular music is very Afro, you know, coming from the African American experience. So they understand some really important rhythmic information. So now it's just a question of, all right, how do you take these few notes you've learned on the trumpet and connect it with something that's really important to you? And the African American tradition is such a rich tradition. This idea that the thing that bothers you, the things that's giving you the blues,
yes,
is the thing that's going to help you take away the blues. I mean, you take that thing that's bothering you and you call out and somebody says, tell me about it. And then you say something else and somebody says, and all of a sudden we're in this circle of support, emotional support that's so freaking real. It's not about, let me brush the thing that's bothering me under the rug. Let me put it out here, but put it in a context where we know how to kind of manage this. We're just so fortunate to have this legacy of African American music and culture, and it came through, you know, an absolute necessity to get through the hard times of slavery, and now it's this unbelievable structure that helps human beings live a good life. So this can be, it's not just for people who are older. You know, it can be very visceral for 7, 8-year-old kids. They don't need to know the whole history of Count Basie. But if you say, ba-doo-be-oo, and then you say, Count Basie, ba-doo-be-oo, Count Basie, ba-doo-be-oo, Count Basie, ba-doo-ba-doo, 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 Count Basie, now blow your horn. I mean, man, you feel that. And that groove, I used to play through all the elementary schools and do different things through the schools, hundreds of shows for kids.
Yeah.
They love jazz. They love swing. They love blues. They just have to have an opportunity to see themselves in it. And then, man, they just run with it.
Well, talking about seeing yourself in it, I mean, all the while you also have been pursuing and have a career as a musician. And it's interesting also this kind of childlike playfulness because, you know, I was checking out this record that you put out recently, Squeeze In Tight.
All right.
It's a very blues forward record. It's songs for solidarity, you call it.
Yep.
These are themes that apply to all of us at any stage in our life, but there is something where I could almost see this record as being a record for kids. I mean, it's a sophisticated, swinging, hip record, but some of the thematic material is like, you know, you've got this tune about picking yourself up again. I forget which the tune is. Basically like, let yourself fail, or it's okay when it doesn't work out the way you wanted it to. You start over again. And I saw an interview or something where you said that particular song was influenced by or inspired by realizing that you had taught Charlie Puth when he was younger and that he was still using some of the stuff that you taught him back in the day.
Yeah. Yes. Make Room is the name of that song. Charlie Puth was my student when he was 12 years old. And we recently reconnected because a newspaper reached out to me to confirm that I was his piano teacher. And I was like, Charlie? That's Charlie Puth? He wasn't Charlie Puth when I was teaching him, right? But then Charlie tweeted me and he showed me this picture. There's a picture of us when he was 12. It's on my website together. And he said, Eli, he said, I would still remember some of the chords that you taught me, you know? And I'm showing him like an E major 7 in the picture or something. And I said, really, which chords? You know, man, because it certainly worked out for you. He's made all these hits. And I'm so proud of him because he did the Super Bowl. He did this great reharm on the Star Spangled Banner. And he seems to be going back more into his jazz roots now, which is very exciting. So I'm just so proud of him. He's one of my many students that have gone on to be not as famous in the pop world as that, but working musicians and active and successful in that regard. But, you know, so he gave me that idea, let me try to write like a more popish kind of song. But then at the same time, I was thinking a lot about this challenge of life. We try stuff and a lot of times it doesn't work out. And, you know, part of life is learning how to roll with that. And so that's what that song is. The childlike quality, also Squeeze In Tight, if I could just talk about that a little bit. That song was actually written just after the pandemic, when I first went into an elementary school to do a program, and the kids had to sit 1 seat apart. They still had to social distance and wear a mask and everything. And it was the first auditorium program gathering since the pandemic. So it was the first time the kids could actually be in the auditorium. And I was like, what can I do with today's concert to try to give them something that helps? And I was like, man, everybody needs a hug. Everybody needs a hug. So I was like, okay, squeeze in tight. And then I came up with this idea of this song that would just be, it was like an activity song. So, and it was all about giving yourself a squeeze, but then feeling the solidarity of kind of the collective squeeze. So that's very much childlike, absolutely.
It is childlike, right? And then if I understand, then the second tune, Blues Wash, is instead of being brainwashed, we need to be blues washed. That's
exactly
basically the concept?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Blues wash.
So these are right. They are playful. I know you play them in clubs and you play these tunes and, you know, for adults that are out having a drink and on a date night or whatever, but so much great music and great art can operate on multiple levels like that, where if you want to tune into something as an adult with this sort of more nuanced view of it, you can, but certainly this music that you're making is, I think, operating on both levels.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much, Leo.
Oh, yeah. All right. So speaking of operating on both levels, Jazz Power Initiative. Now, this, I understand it's changed its name. Has it changed its mission? When the name changed, did the mission change as well?
Well, we started out as a jazz drama program because it was all about these jazz musicals that we were creating at the Louis Armstrong Middle School. And we ended up writing 5 jazz musicals for children as a way of getting, large communities engaged in jazz. And then we published them. 2010, we had Theatrical Rights Worldwide, published a couple of them. Avatar Studios produced recordings. The great Kirk Imamura was wonderful, and Jim Anderson was so helpful in us producing those 3 records, Holding the Torch for Liberty about women's suffrage, Noah's Ark, which is basically about climate change and a modern retelling of Noah's Ark, and Message from Saturn, which is about the healing power of the blues. So we recorded those records with a professional band and youth singers, and soon realized we needed to have our own educational program that would help train kids to be able to do this kind of thing, because it's just not that present in the schools, especially in New York. There's no, as far as I know, and I hope somebody calls me and says, no, there is one, and I want to learn all about it, but there's no high school jazz voice program in New York City right now. We do not have a jazz voice teacher teaching in the high school. They usually do musical theater or opera. Unless you know somebody. Do you know somebody?
No, you don't. No, my daughter is a freshman at Murrow High School in Brooklyn, and she's in the vocal program. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. There are 4 or 5 choirs in that program, and not one is a jazz vocal program. And these are all kids who audition to get into the vocal program. And there's a gospel, but there's not
right.
There's not jazz.
So it seems that in New York, we cover African-American tradition through gospel. And LaGuardia has a fantastic gospel program. And I had a student who actually was assistant conductor. She was amazing. And that was great. But there's no jazz vocal, you know? So we started developing a pedagogy at Jazz Power where we're teaching jazz voice, and we're teaching it. We don't really do jazz choir. We teach it from a blues orientation. So it's about getting the culture. It's about telling your story. It's about developing good vocal technique and being able to be flexible to sing multiple styles of African-American based music. So we have a whole vocal pedagogy we developed. We have the musicals. We also teach piano here now. So we started to realize over some time, you know what, and now we produce concerts. Half of what we do is producing community concerts, about 30 concerts a year, about 1,000 children that we're introducing to jazz in Northern Manhattan each year. And then we got about 25 kids who are here 3 or 4 times a week, just doing all kinds of activities, tap dance, singing, piano lessons. We give them a keyboard to take home. So we realized we needed to have a name that more kind of captured the overall impact of what we're doing. And that's how we came up with Jazz Power Initiative.
I went to the University of Wisconsin, and I took Richard Davis, the bass player, was there for years. And he led ensembles, but he also taught black music history. In 4 semesters, it was like rhythm section, singers, saxophone, trumpet, I think is how he organized it. And you could not complete the course without getting up in front of this huge room of other students and singing the blues. Everybody had to sing the blues in the history class, not the music class. But
wow.
You study this history, you will sing the blues. And it was, you know, when you just talk about this and how empowering it is and how it connects you to the history and the tradition, I think, wow, man, he was really onto something with that.
He sure was onto something. And did it continue after he passed on? Did somebody pick that up?
You know, I don't know how that class is being taught now and who is doing it. I go home to Wisconsin, where I'm from, every year. I'm going to look into that. I'm curious now too.
It's great to know because, like, for instance, when I had my blues band, I worked with a singer from Massachusetts named Kate McGarry, and she is Irish Catholic from Cape Cod. And when I heard her sing, I was like, how do you get so much blues in your voice? She said, well, I studied with Horace Boyer at UMass. So Dr. Boyer was a scholar of African-American music. He was the editor of Lift Every Voice and Sing, the black and red hymnal you'll see in a lot of churches. And he and Fred Tillis started the Afro-American music program at UMass. And Kate McGarry was a student there, a lot of other wonderful people. She would study with Horace Boyer. He was a scholar of sacred music. In the morning, they would learn spirituals. In the afternoon, they'd study Sarah Vaughan and Carmen McRae. Sure. And she came out with this incredible education. But when those guys passed on, the next people didn't keep that going. They didn't keep that culturally centered thing going at UMass. And it's really lamentable that, you know, that it seems like that's a hard thing to pass from the creator or from the founder generation. And that's one of the things we're really trying to address at Jazz Power. I mean, Amiri Baraka mentored me. Walter Perkins mentored me. Barry Harris mentored me. I played in Illinois Jacquette's big band, you know, as a young man. So they, instilled in me this sense of the blues and swing and this fire. And my goal is, how do we create something that resembles what they gave me for our students today? And how do we create systems that where these kinds of cultural elements can be very alive and present? Because God forbid that we should put jazz into books and dry it out of all its soul and spirit. And that's one of the things I admire about your dad's work. I mean, he was constantly pointing us towards, or is pointing us towards, the spirit of the music, the soul of music through conversation. He wasn't a traditional educator, but a lot of times when jazz goes into the books, it loses all that juice. And that's what we've got to guard against. And we got to try to work together to make sure that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Thinking about my dad's work, the sort of revelation that I think I see here is he was always focused on it as an oral tradition, that it's passed down from one voice to another, from one person. So yes, put it in a book, fine, but you learned it by talking to somebody. Somebody showed you, and then you show it to somebody else. And so it actually is a one-to-one thing. It's somebody showed you, and now you embody this information and you show it to somebody else. And how do you, I don't know if that really operates fully on an institutional level. You're talking about numbers of 25 kids, 50 kids. That's still a manageable amount of kids where you can have a personal relationship with those kids.
Yes, and it is challenging. I'm not sure if it will work on now, I was at Jazz at Lincoln Center. We had a lot of programs that had further reach.
Yes.
In particular, the Jazz Academy, which is the online videos. And I made almost 100 of those videos, including 7 with Barry Harris, which was a huge honor. And I think through there, we got some of the soul and spirit in that, but it's not the same as being with a person in a room with Barry Harris. I mean, how do you recreate that? I try to do it. I have a community workshop here at Jazz Power on Tuesdays, and people say, who have been at Barry's workshops, that sometimes they feel a certain energy here. I'm like, look, I can't do a toenail of what Barry did, but if I can try to create some of that atmosphere. And I do often think of what are the elements of the atmosphere. I mean, for Barry, he treated everybody the same. You'd be like a 10-year-old beginner, or you'd be a college student, or you'd be Chuck Israels. I mean, it would be in the same room, in the same class. And for folks who may not know, Chuck Israels was Bill Evans' bass player, played with John Coltrane. These people would be all in the same room, in the same class, and Barry would treat everybody the same. And within an hour, each person would have something that they could work on. Because he saw the potential in each person. He set a very high bar for what is possible in education. But he never wrote a book. He had some of his students wrote books. We try to put some of his techniques into books, but they don't really fit.
And yet, all you have to do is say the name Barry Harris, and it evokes all of this stuff, a harmonic conception, a point of view, a way of teaching. Just in the sound of his name, it's sort of like people go, oh, yeah, I know. Okay, I see. I know what you're talking about.
Movement. He was always talking about movement. So, we think of movement as rhythmic movement, but the movement of chords and moving chords through scales. But it was also just kind of an approach, So these exercises that he was giving us, it was like to try to give us kind of potentialities. It wasn't like play this formula. It was just try to feel it like this. Try to think about it like this. Yeah. And so I keep thinking, maybe there are, teachable techniques that we could pass on within this, but we got more work to do to try to figure that out.
So given all of this story that you've been telling me, starting with your first job at WBGO, now there's a partnership between Jazz Power Initiative and WBGO. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that and what that might mean moving forward.
Well, it's been an amazing full circle. So, we reconnected with Steve Williams at WBGO this year and started to realize, he told us that you have many initiatives at BGO to build new partnerships. You've got many listeners in Manhattan. You're interested in connecting more with our Manhattan community. You're interested particularly in our uptown community, which is where a lot of African Americans, Latin Americans reside. And that's very much at the heart of what we're doing at Jazz Power. And so we're just finding so many different ways to synergize, whether it be the UN program for International Jazz Day that's happening this week, or a program on June 1st where BGO and WQXR and another radio station are celebrating the 250th anniversary of America, and our young people will perform. So, I mean, when I mentioned WBGO to my students who are 13, 14, 15 years old, they had never heard of it, but it wasn't like they heard of any other radio station either. You know, the idea of radio is kind of a new idea to them.
Yeah.
But of course, you can listen online. And so we're pointing our students and our community towards BGO as a resource for learning about jazz, for finding out what's new in jazz, as well as the history and programs like yours. And BGO is coming into our community whenever possible to meet our people in person and, of course, provide an opportunity for our youth to perform as well. So we're just very excited about the different possibilities. Steve and I have done a few media appearances together. We were on BronxNet, we were on WABC Here and Now, and it just was such an easy conversation between us because it's like we've been drinking the same water, you know, of WBGO. He came to BGO in his 20s as I did, and we had different histories, but a lot of parallels and a lot of just similar values of what this music means to people and how we work together to make sure it's continuously available for generations to come.
And as a matter of fact, you are celebrating Steve in your fundraising event in May 14th.
Yes. Yes.
As I understand it, 3 people who will be celebrated that night at that event.
Yes. Our Syncopated Celebration, May 14th, and it's at Symphony Space, the Leonard Nimoy Talia Theater. We'll be honoring Steve Williams and WBGO. Very excited to do that, as well as the great saxophonist Lakecia Benjamin, who's just on the top of the heap of our saxophonists nowadays, breaking so much new ground with young people. I saw her play for 3,000 people at Newport in the summer, and it was just off the charts amazing. And the fact that I've known her since she was a teenager and she's done many Jazz Power events with us, it just makes it all the more special. Plus, she's from Washington Heights, which is the community that we serve. So we're honoring her with the Changemaker Award, Steve with our Syncopated Partnership Award, and then finally Carmen de la Rosa, who's our city council member, who's been super supportive. She'll be receiving the Miranda Arts and Culture Champion Award, and the Miranda family named that award, and they remained very strong supporters. Of course, Lin-Manuel Miranda lived up here, grew up in Inwood, so we're been very grateful to receive their support as well. It's going to be a great event. And I should say also that Christian McBride is the host. My goodness gracious, it's going to be amazing. And he's going to play. And we're going to play with Lakecia and Christian and me. It's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Eli Yamin, Dr. E, what a treat to talk to you. And I'm just so really moved by all this work and just your spirit talking to you and your passion. You know, it's really palpable.
Oh man, well, thank you, Leo, for this opportunity. And it's so great to get to know you. And I'm started listening to your records as well. And you've got a lot of records yourself, man. Shoot, you got about 20 records.
I relate to you and anybody who's out here trying to do multiple things. You know, like we contain multitudes, and I'm just like you, trying to get as much done as I can while I'm here.
Yeah, man. Well, the more we can work together, the better. Thank you so much for the work that you do here on the podcast.
Thank
Awesome.
you, Eli. Yeah, thank you for your work too. Great to meet you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Beautiful.